shaking, you guys. Welcome back to the Let's Go Win podcast, where we are here to help you be happy, healthy, wealthy, and get better every single day. Conversation we're going to have today is all about bringing value to this world. And the gentleman I'm about to have on, he is literally incredible. They call him, or at least I've been told, a value creation expert. Lee Benson is a value creation expert with over 30 years of experience in the business world. He is the CEO of Execute to Win, a firm that helps organizations of all sizes to accelerate the value they create. Lee began his value creation journey early, pulling weeds for 25 cents an hour. Since then, he has founded and led 7 companies, including Able Aerospace, which he grew from 2 to 500 employees and 2,000 customers in 60 countries, culminating in a 9-figure exit in 2016. Guys, this show was absolutely phenomenal. We focused heavily on one specific area, and that was all about bringing value. You are going to get so much from this conversation in terms of how you can show up more holistically in your life, both in business and personally. The take that Lee has throughout is simple, it's profound, it's smart. And I rarely do hear somebody that's had such a large exit in some of these companies. And again, 9-figure exit out of one of his companies, and he's simply talking about value. So the one huge takeaway I had when he starts his companies, it's really more of an outward focus on what value can I create for the people that I'm going to serve, instead of it being something that is really focused on what am I going to get out of it. So get ready, write these down. He throws a couple of books out there that I think are absolutely tremendous. I'm just so excited that I have Lee in my circle now and someone that I can reach out to, because wow, so much of what he says makes sense. And yet so few of us, I think, are really putting our focus on creating as much value as humanly possible, both for ourselves and our clients. So when you really spin that idea and when you really get focused on how much value can I create, that's when true value comes back to you as well. Enjoy it, you guys. It's an awesome show, and I know you're going to love it. Well, Lee, welcome to the show. It's quite the journey you've had. I'm excited to hear how it all came about. I mean, a 9-figure exit, not a lot of people get to say that. That's pretty remarkable. So welcome, man.
Hey, Jam, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's good to have you. I mean, I guess I'll start with, you went from pulling weeds for 25 cents an hour. So I think of that as, this is just an entrepreneur by heart. My youngest son, he's 14. Since he was 5 years old, every game he plays is building some form of business. Was that kind of how you were? Is that how this whole thing got started? Or what was your entrepreneurial journey? What'd that look like?
Yeah. So when you said, hey, started, 25 cents an hour pulling weeds at, 6, 7 years old, that was kind of a cool thing. A neighbor, unsolicited, not a friend, not a family member, said, hey, would you be willing to do this? Sure, I'll do that. Back in those days, a quarter went a long ways for a kid. And then I was like, this is really neat. And then I started doing other things, shoveling snow, paper routes, and that led to dishwasher, busboy, cook. And then in the 80s, I played in a rock and roll band, probably over 1,000 nights during the 80s. That's how I made most of my money back then. And for me, it was just about exchanging my best efforts for the accumulated best efforts of others, their money essentially that they earned. And this value exchange, I could trust it, right? It never made a lot of sense when it was friends or family, because you didn't know if they were just doing you a favor or something along those lines. However, in the real world, people aren't generally going to pay for something unless they see the value in it. So I love playing that game from a material value creation standpoint. So that evolved into, I'm on my 7th company that I've started from scratch right now. And I look at value creation in 3 different buckets. There's the material side, which is where most people go. But also there's the emotional energy value creation bucket and the spiritual value creation bucket. And the spiritual side for me is just about connection. like understanding myself, being connected to my family, my friends, my communities, all the team members and companies that I work with, companies that I own. And that's pretty darn cool. So for me, creating holistic value in the world appropriately and in balance in all three of those buckets, it's how I think about it. So yeah, I got my journey started a long time ago. But this is incredible. I've had exits from a few million to well into 9 figures, and I feel like I'm barely getting started on the material value creation side. But without the other two, it doesn't feel right. Does that make sense, JM?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, here's what I will say. I have never had somebody say I'm a value creation expert. When I read that, I was like, that's really cool. I'm curious where that did come about because, again, to say everybody wants value. Nobody wants to feel like they didn't get the best part of a transaction where, you know what, I paid for this and I got fantastic value from that. That's a great feeling. But if you pay for something and you're like, you know what, that meal wasn't that good, or I got skimped on this, I looked at that and I was like, that's really cool. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people, but value creation expert, I have not heard. Where did you come up with that, man? Or is that somebody looked at you and said, you know what you are? This is who you are.
So I've never been called a value creation expert before, but that's interesting. Let's go there a little bit. So many people say you need to bring value, add value, do all of that. And it's almost like talking about culture. Almost none of them really know what they're talking about when they bring that up. So what does that really mean, on the value side? And I'm all about creating objectively measurable value in the world and proportionally pushing back on things that take value out of the world. That's my version of practicing virtue. But what really is value, and how do you measure that? So we know when it feels right, we know when it doesn't. So that's real. We totally get it. But what I would encourage, anybody listening to this is just think about how you would measure that, and how can you be more intentional about the value you create and the value that you're purchasing. Like, how do you know it's right relative to other things that you could be spending your money on? But that's where I kind of go. Material value is easy. Here's how much money. Emotional energy value, to me, is the scarcest commodity on the planet. When I'm running on 10 on a scale from 0 to 10 on emotional energy, I feel like I can do anything. I energize rooms that I go into. It's the X factor for leaders when they're leading their teams. It's incredible. And then the spiritual side, I spent a lot of time there thinking about cultivating better connections to my communities that I interact with, friends and family and all of that, and to myself, understanding myself. So I'm doing all three of those things at once. And I think the challenge for most is I call it virtue signaling. Oh, well, money doesn't matter. It's not most important. It's about this, or this other thing over here. However, when you really look at their behaviors, what they're saying is money is what's most important. And so that's really the challenge. Material value creation, incredibly important to cultivate for everybody to maintain their lifestyle. We're exchanging value in the world. That's how we learn to get better and better at that stuff. But if you're not working on the emotional energy side intentionally, and the connection piece in that spiritual bucket intentionally, it's not going to feel right. I'll just, I'll kind of leave it there. That's the challenge. And I've got so many stories where people will be virtue signaling like crazy, and then it all comes back to, but the money, right? What do you think about that, Jam?
Well, when you say value, and I'm putting myself in your shoes for a moment, you've created 7 companies. You have an outward focus of, I'm going to create value. Now, in creating value for others, that obviously will create value back, because it's give and receive in this world. And if you're only giving and not receiving, the whole thing's going to be screwed up. And you're talking holistically. So it's like, look, you have to not only give, but you also have to receive. And so I think, at least my brain goes to, when you're creating these companies, you're like, what value am I going to bring the world? And because we did bring so much value, by the way, I did have that 9-figure exit. I did have this other exit, but it wasn't your initial focus is, I'm going to go do this because I'm going to make X amount of dollars. That's kind of where my head went. I definitely want to explore both the spiritual side and what that looks like for you and what that journey was. But
Yeah.
when I hear value, I think often when I see entrepreneurs struggle is when they're like, what's in it for me first? And
Mm.
that's not what I heard when we talk about creating value. That's really more of an outward focus on what am I going to bring the world?
Yeah, I'm all about you can call it solving problems, in a different way. So more customers will come your direction over another option. But for me, it's about building a value creation machine. So any business that I have, how are we designed to create value? How do we know that we're creating value? Well, the market's responding in a favorable way. How do we know we're creating more and more value over time? They're responding in a bigger way. That's incredible. And then think about the team members that we work with. If it feels amazing to work there because of the entire, I would call it the operating methodology, the rules of engagement, the environment that we created from which they create value. When you get that right, it feels amazing to be part of that. And then you've got this connected piece where do we care about each other? Or are we just numbers, right? Like genuinely, like get the emotional energy and the connected piece and that spiritual bucket, right? The material goes with it. And I'm not saying one's more important than the other. I'm saying they're all important and they're all worthy of cultivating your capabilities to create value there. But we seem to be in this world. And I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, and he just said, man, it really hit me. We were talking about writing a book. He goes, I see all these books. They're just thinly veiled business cards, and there's not much substance to it. But I read both of your books, and they're both amazing. And I said, yeah, I'm working on another one right now, and I think it's going to be by far even better. And he goes, well, what's the secret? I'm looking for a ghostwriter, and I've got I belong to these groups that say you're supposed to work less and make more. And I said, well, here's the secret. You actually lean in and do the work. I wrote every damn one of those words, in there. And there's magic in leaning in and working hard. But we have this culture right now where it's supposed to be really cool to make as much as you can, working as little as you can. I'm all about working super hard because it's fun and let's go for it and have an incredibly blended life where everything's a blast. I mean, that's what I'm cultivating. That's the direction I'm going. But this whole thing about how little can I work and to make as much as possible. And I shouldn't have to lift a finger. And then once you don't do that, now you should only lift half a finger to make a bunch of money. Like, what the heck is going on here in the world? How's this landing on you, JM? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I've said many times to my wife, I don't think I will ever retire. And I don't mean that to say I have idle time. I can, but I love creating things. So I'm with you. It's like if I have too much idle time. So for instance, I love golf, I love pickleball, I love fly fishing. But there's only so much of that that's really filling my bucket. To
Mm-hmm.
really challenge the mind, and that's I think what entrepreneurs and business people do is there's a problem, you get a chance to work on a solution that fills me just as much as being on the golf course with my buddies. It really does. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I was going to put this back to you with what you said, with this world of almost instant gratification, doing as little as you can. With AI, I'm hearing a lot of that where people are like, okay, now I can write a book like snap of a fingers. And like you said, not a lot of substance to it, brother. I'm reading these things and I'm like, oh man, come on. Like, let's put a
Yeah.
little effort out there. I know when I wrote my books, it was a lot of work, man, but there's, I think, some satisfaction. So that's where I land on it. And I guess I don't understand the
Mm.
idea because I enjoy working,
Yeah.
but maybe I don't know. Maybe there's a psychology thing I'm missing on this.
Well, I mean, I think you're getting it right. You know what? And it's really telling when somebody says, "Oh, you must be so proud you're an author. That's so great. Oh, you have two books and they're bestsellers. Oh, you must be so proud." Or you went to this prestigious college or something along those lines. How amazing. I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's the wrong question. The better question is, how did your book move the needle to create real measurable, objectively measurable value in the world? And when you went to college, the purpose of an education, K-12, junior college, advanced, whatever, is to create value in the world. It's not to get a good grade, get a diploma, get a degree, get a job. is to create value in the world. Customers aren't buying your pedigree in most cases, unless you're, a high-end sort of Wall Street firm. They're buying the value of the product or service, the perceived value and the actual value that they get if they're going to come back. So that's the big difference. It feels also, Jam, like we have this culture of extrinsic motivation. How you're seen is so important. I think that's messing the kids up for sure, and it's definitely messing adults up, where it should be intrinsic motivation. And I think it's super healthy. And, for me, it's this way. My purpose, my drive, it's intrinsically motivated. It's sort of essentially permeating out into the world, holistic value creation behaviors within organizations, within families, communities, all of that. And I don't care how I'm seen so much. It's like, I'll go forward and I'm going to keep doing this. And I've got this drive inside. And if something happens to me, where I can't, for example, I'm calling for my home music studio right now. And if I couldn't play guitar, I can just shift and do more writing and speaking to create value. My identity is not as a guitar player. It's as somebody that creates value in the world. And I think most people would benefit from having more of a perspective that way. How do you create value in the world? And there's so many ways to do it. Is it emotional energy? So when I write music, that's emotional energy going into the world. I'm uplifting folks, right? The Beatles, when they wrote songs, impacted billions of folks on the planet, right? In a really positive way. So emotional energy value creation through writing in your books, my books, there's so much great literature out there. Amazing, right? So yeah, it's an interesting world. And I just choose to make my primary drive and purpose how I create value in the world. And if I create, kind of to something you said earlier, if I'm constantly creating as much value as I can appropriately and responsibly in the world, I don't believe there's such a thing as being selfless or altruism. I'm doing this. It feels amazing. So selfishly, I want to feel good. Everybody does what's in their best self-interest for this life or the next. And it exposes me to more opportunities than those that don't think about creating value in the world, that try to control everything and get as much as they can out of every interaction. I call that sort of win-lose interactions. So it's an amazing success strategy for life.
I'm curious, because of your approach being so holistic, if you had ever lost sight of that, because I did. I will tell you, the first company and a half, I'll split the second company in half, where it was like, yeah, man, I was all of a sudden really focused on this one metric of making more income, really trying to be looked at in a certain light. And it's shocking from a kid coming from Montana that wasn't important to me. It became important. Meanwhile, I'm losing my relationship with my wife. We were separated for a year. My health was a freaking disaster. I was almost 300 pounds. And I say that because I'm curious if you've just always really had this balance or harmony, whatever we want to call that. Because the one thing, if I could eradicate, there's two things actually, is self-limiting beliefs and 100% this idea that it's not, for executives, I see so many bringing value to the world, however, forgetting about what's really important. So my question would be, did you always really have a nice head on your shoulders about this? Or did you have that moment, as I had, like, holy shit, I'm about to lose my family. It's time to look in the mirror and let's do better.
Yeah, for me, it's been an evolution. Pieces of this, I think, are there for all of us, and we can choose to go in this direction or not. And where I really started cultivating my capabilities here, were, early 90s, as I'm starting to build employees and I'm making it all about, hey, we have to be profitable, keep everybody in paychecks and do all of that. I knew the value of what we brought to the families that depended on us and our suppliers and doing good work for our customers and all of that. But I was really hard over on the money side. And it's like, wait a minute, I want really high energy, productive engagement in what we're trying to do. So the emotional energy piece really important. Now the connectedness piece, so for me, it was an evolution. I just kept walking that way, but there was never a moment where, hey, I'm going to lose my family or something's going to happen. I just kept going, this doesn't quite feel right yet. So how can I change? And this isn't, again, most people virtue signal way more than they actually practice virtue. For me, I want it to feel right. And when people say, well, it can't be about the money, and like we said earlier, I go, wait a minute, money, it's all important. All three buckets are important. So how do we get the balance to where it actually feels right and stop virtue signaling, right? Like even in business, oh, I'm so busy and that's business virtue signaling. It's the craziest thing. I mean, there's virtue signaling in every single category if you think about it. Those that don't have a ton of money and they really struggle on the material value creation capabilities for themselves. They're the first sometimes to point out, well, if I had that money, I would spend it differently. How dare that billionaire spend money this way or that way? Oh my gosh, what an amazing virtue signaler you are. So that's what you would do if you actually had the capabilities of generating that kind of wealth. So I just think we should back off on that and just focus on ourselves and cultivating our ability to create value in balance in each of those three macro buckets.
Yeah, no, it's simply profound. Honestly, the way you're saying it, it's like it makes sense, but I lost track so fast. I want to switch gears a little bit. One of your books is called Your Most Important Number.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I haven't read the book. What does that mean? This guy's grown these companies. He's focused on, making sure that spiritually he's in check. He's emotionally, we're doing this. So what is the number thing? What's that all about?
Yeah, it's all about creating value faster as an organization, holistically again. So how do we get companies to continually increase the value of the organization and do the work really well to where over time that actually starts to accelerate? And so I developed a methodology I call the MIND methodology, which stands for most important number and drivers, where every organization has one number that above all others says they're winning and losing the game, and it should drive the majority of the right behaviors. It describes the value of the business. It could be net profit, could be EBITDA, could be cash flow if you're capital intensive, and everything else is subordinate. So getting the emotional energy piece right with leaders and all of that, incredibly important. If that's low, you're going to lower your ability to create more value as an organization and how it's measured. Same thing, on the culture side, get that wrong. All that happens if the team members aren't connected to each other. It all really fits in. But imagine a most important number at the top, and then the CEO's job is to continually increase the value of the organization. By proxy, the senior leader's team is to do the same thing. And now every single function in the organization, whether it be HR or service, marketing, sales, production, whatever that business is, they have a most important number that does the same two things. How does it describe whether they're winning or losing the game, the value that team was designed to create, and it will drive the majority of the right behaviors? Because you could pick a number that looks good, but it drives the wrong behaviors, right? So you got the most important number at the top. All the teams right below that have a most important number, and then you can cascade this out to thousands of teams. It's such a simple way of getting teams around, creating value. And in fact, it's way more effective than traditional goal setting. I've never seen traditional goal setting stand the test of time, ever. I've seen this catch fire time after time going through. It's how people like to interact on a team. There's the score that says we're winning or losing. We might measure 20 other things, but only to help us make better decisions to improve that number. And then in my role, this is the best work that I'm doing to contribute to improving that. Simple, elegant. So any organization that applies the MIND methodology that I go in, pretty good detail in Your Most Important Number book, they just get better. I mean, it's not uncommon within a year, they've doubled profitability. I've got one, I run CEO groups. I call it Execute, they're CEO Masterminds. And we apply the MIND methodology to no more than 8 CEOs in the room. And last year in my groups, I'm currently running 3 groups, probably going to add 3 more this year. But in my groups, the lowest performer was about 38% growth in profitability, and the highest was 1,100%. Because they're following this. it works. It just, and the CEOs are following it. They're not all doing it in their organizations fully, but they're doing, pieces of it. So that's why I wrote the book. Like, how do I take this to the world? The last chapter is a do-it-yourself DIY chapter. I want this holistic approach to value creation to just permeate everywhere. I mean, my aspirational goal is I want 1,000 chairs with 3 or 4 groups each of these execute masterminds getting holistic value creation into the world, and that'll make a difference in a really big positive way.
Yeah, I want to dive a little bit more into the traditional goal setting versus this idea, because I heard a lot of clarity there, and I was like, well, that's cool. You had mentioned earlier in the show, people say that very catchy phrase or word of culture, and like you said, I don't know. I feel pretty confident saying 90% of companies have no freaking clue what their culture is, and they're not intentional about what it is. Therefore, they really don't have their arms wrapped around it. So I want to build kind of a scenario, if you could, so we can really grab onto this idea of traditional goal setting versus finding that most important number, how somebody could implement. Obviously, I want them to go get your book. I'm going to check it out because I had not heard the term. I think it's cool. But what I did hear is 1,100% and the lowest being 38% profitability. Okay, I'm in. So what would that look like if somebody's going, oh, well, okay, Lee, I've already set my goals. How the heck can I go? And your company's called Execute to Win. How can I execute on this today so that I'm not swimming upstream with the traditional goal setting?
First step really is read the book. It's a quick read. There's an audio book. I do 25-minute interviews after each chapter. I narrate it. And then it'll make a lot more sense. It's really straightforward how I wrote this. And I work with companies from startups to $60 billion plus market cap public companies, tens of thousands or more employees, and everything in between that and 2 employees. But when I go in and look at the goals that they have, over 95% of them are just not very thoughtful. And what does it feel like as an employee? Hey, every quarter, set 1 to 3 goals, get it approved by your manager, and rinse and repeat every quarter. Ew. Like, it just feels terrible for them to do that. And no wonder the goals are so terrible. They're really not connecting anything. It's more just activity, things they know they can hit, et cetera. So what's more important is to kind of ask the question, how is this team designed to create value for the organization? And how would you even know? And that's the reflection of the most important number. Now, show me the best work that each team member is doing and you're collectively doing as a team to improve that number, right? Super straightforward, really easy. And if you have to measure 1 additional thing or 100 additional things to help you make better decisions to improve that number, do it. And make sure everybody's really clear in their roles. For every role that you have, and I'm not a fan of job descriptions at all. I think they're mostly completely useless. But, when you design a role, there should be 2 to 4 max outcome-based responsibilities that each team member has, if you're in that role. And then have a list of maybe it's 10, 15, 30 capabilities that somebody probably has to have to realistically have a good shot at hitting those outcomes that they're going to be responsible for. That becomes their training plan, going through. So when I look at bringing somebody on board, what's the role? What are the outcomes they're going to own? Are they clear on what has to happen? Are they clear if it falls below this line that it won't work out, but thank you for trying? And then here are the capabilities they need to be able to realistically hit it. And when you look at the capabilities, if they can't check a bunch of those boxes, then you won't fall for the trap of confusing enthusiasm for capability, because people, oh yeah, I totally got this, I can do it. And then when it doesn't work, they say, oh, it didn't work. No, you weren't capable of doing it, right? So that's how I think about it. Super simple, cascading these most important numbers out to the front line. Doesn't matter how big the organization or small the organization is. I've seen it work everywhere, and you can DIY it, after reading the book, or we've got lots of certified consultants that can help you go faster because we're in the room. Or an amazing first step is, go to our website, etw.com, and learn about the Execute Masterminds and join one of our groups. We have lots of chairs that have groups, and I've got my own groups. And this year, I'm going to start 3 more groups. If you want to inquire about that, let me know.
Well, there's a ton of benefit to that, guys. I mean, look, when you're in it with other CEOs or executives that are doing the work at the same time, there's accountability happening. There's ideations going on. People are trying different things. This works. This doesn't. And you get to have 8 people in this group instead of just you alone trying it. So absolutely go check that out. I hope you guys are seeing. You said 2 to 4, and I agree with you on the job descriptions, by the way. I think it's so antiquated that, this is what we're going to write this paragraph, and this is what so now if they do this and a very minimal job that, okay, you're passing the bar. No, I call it the core 3. And I was interested, you said 2 to 4 things. What are the core 3 things that you have to do on a daily basis in order to really say, you know what, I did a good job today. We moved the needle ahead. Yeah. And so it was interesting that you fell within that 2 to 4. How did you develop this whole methodology? Was this just trial and errors? You're going through it because it's unique and yet it's simple, which is my favorite part. And literally, I'm looking at your shirt. If you're not seeing him on video, it says "Do less, better." And I was like, yes, I absolutely love that. So I wrapped a few questions into there, but how did you come up with this whole methodology?
First, I would say I don't think there's anything new when it comes to management and leadership in the last 5,000 years. But how things are packaged can be new. And I believe I packaged this in a really unique way. And to answer your question directly, it's an evolution to be able to create more and more value over time. And if you're applying, this is my view, math, common sense, logic, facts, and reason to continually doing the right work, testing, packaging, and taking the right steps to create more and more value over time, all of us will go down the same path, the same road signs, wisdom, epiphanies, all of it, and develop this stuff. You're saying, I'm listening to you, you're saying the same things I am in a different way. There's thousands of ways to approach this. So that's what I think it is. And where people go off the rails is when they're not applying math, common sense, logic, facts, and reason. There's something else going on. There's political things going on. There's money pressure, relationship pressures, health. And all of that is influencing, their ability to create value in their organizations or as an individual. You're right. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And I think, I would encourage all the listeners to, kind of contemplate what would it be like to make every decision through a value creation lens. How will this create value in the world? Material, emotional, spiritual, and it's not win-lose. It's got to be win-win value creation across the board. Once you start on this journey, you're not better than anybody else. You're not worse than anybody else. But if it's all about value, you're not even comparing anymore to anyone else. You're doing what you do, and it's interesting for me. I want to make this point because I think the emotional energy is the most important value creation bucket because it supercharges everything else. I think if I had one that was a superpower, it's going to be that one. Even though I've done really well on the material side, and my weakest one is the spiritual side, and I'm really working on getting that way more in balance with everything else. But I'll see a gathering and there'll be a family that's a low-income family, 4 kids, the husband and wife, amazing connectedness with their communities on the spiritual side. Their emotional energy is awesome. And then here comes somebody in the room that's boasting about their money in some way, shape, or form. And then I watch this family kind of lower themselves in terms of how they rank to these others and what's going on. I was like, wait a minute, I'd rather all day long go hang out with your family than hang out with this person where they brag about themselves in their house full of stuff with no love or spirituality or anything. So isn't that interesting, Jam, to think about it that way? That why are we leveling up or down based on perceived worth, net worth, material value, when the others they feel better? You want all three, but it just why do we do that? What are your thoughts?
I ask this question often. My wife grew up with, pretty well off. I grew up very middle class, I would say, and I've never understood the idea that someone makes money and there's a perceived hierarchy somehow because of the amount of income. That idea I don't get. Now, my mom was a teacher for 39 years. We all know teachers don't make a lot of money. She's an incredible woman
Yeah.
she's incredibly balanced in terms of emotionally, spiritually, although I would say her spirituality and what I grew up with, I was raised Catholic, never jived with me, man. It just wasn't my thing. So for me, I've really gone to more of a Buddhist route, Taoism. I mean, some of the Eastern philosophies. And by the way, I don't care. I don't care what you choose for your spirituality. I think the fact that people are checking in on it and making sure you're filling that bucket, that's truly when I see people that are well-rounded, are happy inside. So to answer your question, I don't understand it. I know that it exists in some people's eyes that because somebody makes X amount of dollars, somehow they have a hierarchy higher than those that don't. I don't believe that's the case at all. And if you go back like Buddha, look, man, he was a prince. He literally decided, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to meditate by a tree for a whole bunch of years. And I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
that doesn't do much for me. I value people that bring true love and joy and so, yeah, I know it exists, but I don't know why. I will say I don't understand it.
Well, I just think it's the culture, it's this extrinsic motivation that's going on out there. And for me, it's the same as, at least in my mind, there's zero correlation between how attractive somebody is and whether they're a good or bad person. Zero correlation. And the money, you can practice, you can have a ton of money and practice it with virtue, or you can go the opposite direction. And again, the way I think about practicing virtue is creating this objectively measurable value in the world, and at the same time pushing back on things that are taking value out of the world. And so you're either doing that or you're taking value out of the world by rigging the game in some way, right? If you're a common petty thief, you're taking stuff and you're basically making those that are creating value pay for that because they have to elevate prices. And then all the way to the elites. I mean, globally, there are folks that, skim trillions of dollars off of the low and middle income families. And that's taking value out of the world. And they do it by rigging the game. And I think that's, for me, it's a big part of why politics just feels so bad, because it's a culture primarily of rigging the game. And our presidential elections, it's almost like the Super Bowl of game rigging to me, and everybody jockeying for their position so they can rig the game the best they can. Whereas, gosh, I wish government here in the United States anyway would do what I think they're supposed to do. Their job is to continually improve conditions to work, live, learn, and play for the citizenry. And over time, do it at a lower and lower relative cost. That's how we know we're doing the right work. Instead of, it's all about who wins. Like who gets elected. So let's create more value in the world, and let's stop taking it out of the world, especially those doing it intentionally.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because we both have win in our company's name. So we're not opposed to the idea of winning. However, these selfish agendas, and again, the politics is the easy one. People are driving their agenda. Lobby groups literally exist to drive that specific agenda. I think where we've lost sight is it's a finger pointing thing. Well, he's that, she's that, I'm on this side, you're on that side. We forgot that the true game was for the US, and I'll just speak for the United States, to thrive and continue to prosper and help the world. We forgot that. Now it's like, no, my party is better, therefore I want this. Even if that means destroying a lot of our country. I will tell you, Lee, I pull my hair out. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't like where we've gone, because I remember a time when if there was a president, it didn't matter if you voted for him or him at the time. I guess it's always been him so far. It didn't matter if you voted for him or not. You respected and you supported them. Once they were in office, I think we've lost so much sight of that ideal that it's like, well, I didn't vote for him, so I'm going to do everything I can to not support what they're doing. And it's really toxic.
Well, I don't believe most of the leaders in Washington, and it's kind of growing, into the states and the local level as well, really care about creating better conditions for the citizenry. It's about winning and having the influence and basically accreting power and money. So how do we get them back to where they should be? And this has been going on for thousands of years. It's like you've got times where the value creators expand and the people that take value out of the world, contract. And right now we're in a place where the people taking value out of the world, especially at scale, have gotten too big. And we're starting to see the inflation of those that create values. This has been going on for a long time. I don't get very frustrated with it because it just is. And I don't want to be a wreck emotionally about it. So I'm going to be, and I've heard the phrase so many times by different people, but I'm going to be a happy warrior and keep pushing to create value and push back on things that take value out of the world. And with what they're doing right now, if you think about it, my belief is the most powerful weapon in recorded history is weaponizing false morality. So every position is, here's this moral thing that I'm using under false pretenses to get people to go along with it, because it's such a powerful drive in all of us to want to be seen as good, part of something good, be good. And when we have our leaders saying you're bad and you'll only be good when you do what I say you will, it's wild to me how powerful that is. I mean, I think that alone is why teaching our kids to be critical thinkers is so important, so they won't fall for this stuff. They can go through the process. Does this make sense when you go through the right filters?
Yeah, it's my wife and I have been going through this a little bit recently. There's some challenges when you're running a travel baseball team. I know this sounds crazy, but I'm just going to put it out there, where people want drama or they feed off it or whatever. And my wife is the manager of the team, and we refuse to engage in this. I'm going to burn you down and say you're this or you're that. We refuse to do it. And I just find it absolutely fascinating how some people, they want to just, no, tell us all the dirt. And it's like, no, this is not, and I see it in companies too. This is one thing I'm like, look, if you're going to have a crucial conversation and it's going to be a negative, make sure that's behind closed doors. Do not bring that into this public forum where you're just going to burn somebody down and feed that ego. Because ultimately that's all you're doing is feeding that ego. No matter if they were dead wrong, if you do it, you're going to lose your influence with your group. And so that's what I've been talking to my wife about. I'm like, look, I don't care what they say. I don't care how bad it gets. Stay true to you, because you can look in the mirror. You can know that you're not in the right, but you didn't do anything wrong either. Yeah. So I don't know.
Well, 100%. If you're looking through the value creation lens as you make decisions, have conversations, clearly those conversations are not creating objectively measurable value in the world. They're taking value out of the world. It's sucking emotional energy value out of the world. So I think that's, again, a really powerful outcome by, thinking about this value creation approach to things. Oh, and just to mention it, the state of high conflict that people get in, so they're just ready to fight, especially on the political side. If they would just all go back to what's going to create better conditions to work, live, learn, and play, it would be so much better. But this woman, Amanda Ripley, wrote a book called High Conflict, and she describes really well how you get to that state, and then facts don't matter anymore because you're right and the other side's wrong, and that's just it. But what an amazing book to describe it, because it's almost never what each side thinks is going on the other side. It'd be a worthwhile read for the listeners.
No, I appreciate that. I say often, I've never changed one person's belief. Not once in my life have I changed someone's belief. That doesn't mean you can't influence by, showing up in a certain way. But by me saying, this is my stance and I'm right and you're wrong, it's never changed. Never once. This time is flying by, and I have like 17 questions on my mind. But instead of me being selfish and choosing mine, I'm just curious, open form, anything I didn't know enough to ask you, Lee, where you're like, we got to get this to the audience before we wrap up, because I love the way you show up. You've created some amazing stuff of value for the world, for your family, for yourself. Anything I missed where you're like, we got to talk about this before we start to end the show?
Yeah, you and I literally could talk about this for days. We could just keep this conversation going. There's so much, and it'll just keep leading to other things. But this concept of value creation, it's wildly important. I did launch my own podcast starting about 3 weeks ago. It's called Show Your Value, The Art of Value Creation, interviewing lots of wonderful guests that have done amazing things in terms of, bringing value and creating that in the world. So that's where I'm continuing the conversation every week. I'm dropping another one. I'm doing at least 2 of these interviews. And for me, it's a philanthropic effort over there to get this concept, to get people thinking about holistic value creation, because most aren't thinking this way. I don't know what your take is, JM, but most aren't. They're not thinking about creating value this way, holistically, in 3 buckets.
Yeah, I unfortunately I have to agree with you, and it has become a very dog eat dog world. It's like, well, what's in it for me? And it's kind of a sad existence, and it's not a fulfilling one, I guess, is at the end of the day. When you lay your head down or let's say you're on your deathbed, I always kind of go back to that. The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. It's a book that sticks in my mind when I make some decisions where I'm like, how am I going to, on my deathbed, how am I going to look and feel? And one of the things she says, there's not one person that's like, gosh, I wish I had $10 million more in my bank account. It doesn't matter at that point. I wish I did more board meetings. They don't say that. And so it's one of those things where I just think that's the perspective that I like to have at the front of mind, because I do want to be very, very peaceful when that day comes, to where, you know what, I gave it my very best. I did create a ton of value for the people that I love and the people that I serve. That's my hope.
Even for me, when I attend a board meeting, work with a client, meetings in my own business, I'm not there to attend a meeting. I'm there to perpetuate more value being created. I feel awesome about that. Like, that is so great. And I've nudged a bunch of things, and I can just see it taking, root and catching fire in different parts of the world. And I feel super great about all of that. And the reason I wrote my second book that I published last year, and I co-authored it with Scott Donnell, it's titled Value Creation Kid, The Healthy Struggles Your Children Need to Succeed. It's about getting to the kids so they understand the purpose of an education is to create value in the world and everything they do. And struggle is really, really necessary and good. And if you can intentionally design healthy struggles, even better. But all struggle can be leveraged to create more value in the world. So I look at that and say, hey, if we get the kids right, and they launch into adulthood as self-reliant, critical thinking, they create value, all of that, value, family, community, everything. It'll be an amazing world that we age out in. So fix the kids, fix the world. And I'm on this mission, and it's a blast.
We might have to have another show, because I talk about education reform curriculum often. And I love what you just said there in terms of both the struggle. It's not just about creating these drones or these, workers, but rather, and you said earlier, we want our kids to have critical thinking skills. I think it's one of the things that as parents, it's our duty. So definitely want to explore that with you at another time. Lee, if people wanted to connect with you, whether it's to be a part of the Execute, the family that you've built, they want to go find your books, where's the best place to connect with you online?
Yeah, please go to my website for the business, which is etw.com, and also connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me there pretty easily.
You brought a ton of value today, and I'm not saying that, tongue in cheek. It was awesome. I love what you stand for. Shout out to Bo Hawkins for connecting us, man. He said I was going to love you. I do. I think it was really a great show. And thank you for showing up the way you did, man.
Yeah, you and I are super aligned on a lot of things, I can tell in this short conversation. Thank you, JM. Appreciate it, man.
Truly my pleasure. Guys, please go check Lee out. How many times did he say the word value and meant it authentically throughout the show? That is not often that I have guests that do that. Usually it's like, let me tell you about my accolades. Let me show you about this, which, look, be proud of it, but that's not what Lee did. I mean, he literally said, I want you to look through a different lens. He created for business owners a simple formula that literally, he said, the minimum was 38% growth. Go check it out. I think this was phenomenal, and I'm looking to have Lee on again. Until next time, you guys, remember your mindset matters. I appreciate you all so much. We'll talk soon.